Hi, welcome to my channel and thanks for tuning in. This is my review of the second episode of the new Loki TV series called The Variant. There will be spoilers from the get-go, so let's get started. After the recap, we jump straight to a Renaissance fair in the 1980s, and I do wonder why the Minutemen don't make more effort to blend in. Yes, I know they're planning to reset the timeline, so nothing they do is really going to matter, but you do think it might be easier for them if they, tried to blend in a bit more, if they weren't standing out so much. They get challenged a couple times over not fitting in. Seems like it might be easier if they at least wore something fairly generic that wouldn't stick out so much. The team of Minutemen are lured into a trap, but this time one of them, C-15, is possessed by the variant and used to take out her teammates before being kidnapped. Then after the titles we jump to what might have been my favourite part of the episode, Loki in an office having to go through corporate onboarding. He's not paying all that much attention, instead reading a magazine. He's being trained by a hologram, Miss Minutes, who's also the narrator from the introductory video last week. When he asks if she's a recording or actually alive, she says sort of both. He then proceeds to swat at her with the magazine like she's a fly. This actually felt mischievous. Yeah, he seemed to be having fun, he was smiling, and he wasn't actually trying all that hard to hit her. Some of his swats were rather slow, giving her plenty of time to jump out the way. Mobius arrives and tells him there's been another attack and gives him a jacket to wear. B-15 is briefing everyone on what happened to C-15. She's clearly not happy about Loki being there. It's revealed how they've pruned a lot of Loki variants, more than almost any other, and they show off a series of them. This doesn't really make sense to me. The TVA reset every branch timeline, and we know they have to do so quickly. How could any variant of Loki become that different? How did any branch of the timeline go so far to end up with a Loki so different from the version on the sacred timeline? Mobius lists Loki's commonly known powers, and Loki corrects him when he says illusion casting, saying it is in fact duplication casting, which is quite different in his opinion. He seems quite offended by the mistake. Apparently illusion is projecting an image from outside oneself, whereas duplication casting is creating a facsimile, which is a true holographic mirror of the molecular structure. After the briefing, Mobius dangles the chance of a meeting with the timekeepers in front of Loki to try and dissuade him from betraying them, and this seems to be of great interest to Loki. When they get back to 1985, Loki asks why they can't just go back in time to before the attack and stop it. Mobius explains that Nexus events destabilise the timeline, so they have to come back in real time. While this might have seemed obvious to those familiar with time travel tropes, it was a nicely worked in bit of exposition for those who weren't. While Loki does admit that he didn't get through all of their training, saying he found their propaganda exhausting, he does show that he retained the information of what training he did get through. And makes a very valid point about how resetting the timeline is a rather polite way of saying disintegrate everyone in the vicinity. Side note, when Loki is side-eyeing your methods, you may want to reconsider your claim to being the good guys. B-15 suggests they do a search, but Loki tells them to stop, saying that if they leave they will end up like the dead Minutemen. He then proceeds to stall with a speech about listening and comparing the TVA to the gods of Asgard. He claims it's another trap and claims that he can bring in the variant if he's assured that he won't be disintegrated as soon as the job is done. It almost looks like they've bought it, but Mobius calls bullshit. Seems Loki pushed it just that little bit too far to be believable. I don't think Loki was specifically trying to betray them here. I think maybe when presented with the opportunity of messing with them, he just couldn't help himself. It's in his nature. And for all it is portrayed as this big thing that messes up the mission, it didn't really have any consequence. There wasn't anything there for them to find. It also might have been a bit of petty revenge against B-15, messing up her plans after she cut him off and dismissed him. Stalling the TVA also gives him a bargaining chip that he might be able to use in future when he meets the variant. And I do think that he genuinely, and not unreasonably, wants assurance that he will be allowed to live. He saw the chance and he went for it. Mobius's reaction seems rather more entertained than angry, though B-15 is rather less pleased. Next we see Mobius in a meeting with Ravonna, the judge from the first episode. Seems like she is the boss and she's not happy with how the mission went. She has an office with trophies from prior missions, and Mobius is rather jealous that not all of them are from him. She compares Loki to Mobius, which I think is a good point, and we might be seeing more evidence of them being similar down the line. Mobius is the first person we've seen able to keep up with Loki when it comes to manipulation. She also says he has a soft spot for broken things and reminds him that Loki is an evil, lying scourge. That is the purpose he serves on the sacred timeline. Mobius argues that maybe Loki wants to mix it up, and something about how he said that made me think he might be talking about himself, that he is tired of playing the same role, that he wants more. He defends what's happened by saying that he learnt more, and learning that Loki likes to solve for time will help him catch the variant. This seems to be clutching at straws. If Mobius really has studied all of Loki's life, that really should not have been new information. It appears that Ravonna has direct communication with the Timekeepers, or at least she claims she does. I'm still not convinced they actually exist. Though if they don't, I don't know if she's lying or if she's being lied to. So far, Ravonna does seem to be on the level. Mobius gets away with it this time, but she does warn him that if anything goes wrong again, there will be nothing she can do. He does admit that he's not sure that he believes in Loki, and says that if he's wrong, he will delete Loki himself. Which I think is realistic. Thinking Loki can change is a bit of a long shot. Loki is waiting outside and tries to explain what happened in the mission, but Mobius is having none of it. Mobius's whole demeanour here is different. He's angry and frustrated, and I don't know which was real. Was he playing it down in his meeting with Ravonna, or is he playing it up here to try and put Loki on the defensive? He then tries to play on Loki's ego, calling the variant a better version of him, and straight up tells Loki that he believed he could use it to motivate him. Loki finds it adorable that Mobius thinks he can manipulate him. Loki, darling, what do you think Mobius has been doing all this time? And he says he's working on his own plan. Mobius is not surprised and lays out Loki's assumed plan to take over the TVA, which Loki's reaction seems to confirm, but I do feel he gave it up a bit too easily there. Loki asks why Mobius is sticking his neck out to him, and Mobius gives him two options and says to pick whichever one he likes. One, that he sees a scared little boy who he feels sorry for, and two, that he will say whatever he needs to catch the variant. And I think it's actually both. He does feel for Loki, and does hope that he's right about him, but at the same time, he also is going to do whatever he needs to catch the variant. People rarely do anything for just one reason. There's always a multitude of factors. Yes, Mobius wouldn't be doing this if he didn't need help catching the variant, but he also wouldn't have chosen this way if he hadn't seen something in Loki. Mobius sets Loki looking through all the files relating to the variant, hoping he'll find something that they missed. We do get the confirmation that the variant is stealing all the reset charges, though we don't know what for yet. And then Loki finds the files relating to Ragnarok and is clearly grief-stricken, even if he will brush it off later when Mobius offers condolences. But then he spots something. He tracks down Mobius to present his theory that the variant is hiding in apocalypses. He then destroys Mobius's lunch in a demonstration of how it doesn't matter what you do to destroy the timeline before an apocalypse, because if everything is about to get wiped out, the timeline can't branch. After some convincing, Mobius does agree to test the theory, and they go to Pompeii. Mobius wants to start with something small, but Loki's not one for subtle and causes a big commotion, which causes 0 variance in the timeline. Theory proved. We also see another similarity between Loki and Mobius. They're both really excited about the impending disaster. Mobius does try to tone it down as being in bad taste, but neither of them really seem all that concerned about all the people that are about to die. Now they just need to work out which apocalypse, and there are far too many to choose from, even with their exact criteria of it needing to be a sudden event with no survivors. There is a nice moment between the two of them when they take a break in the middle of this. Loki asks why Mobius has the jet skiing magazine, and he answers that he just thinks they're cool. Even if he has never or could never ride on one, they remind him of what he is fighting for. Loki again tries to challenge Mobius on his belief in the Timekeepers, and Mobius counters by pointing out that Loki's own story sounds equally fantastical, as much as Loki protests. Loki asks what happens at the end, and Mobius says that the Timekeepers are working on it, but after that there will be no more Nexus points, only order. Loki asks what happens at the end, and Mobius says that the Timekeepers are working on it, but after that there will be no Nexus points, only order. Loki thinks this sounds incredibly boring, and from what we've seen of him, I think Mobius would find it incredibly boring as well. Then Mobius remembers the candy from his mission to France, which allows them to narrow it down to a few years on Earth. They finally identify where they think the variant is hiding: Alabama 2050, in a superstore where people are sheltering from a hurricane. Mobius convinces Ravonna to authorize a mission based on their theory. She expresses concern about trusting Loki again, and Mobius points out that Loki did just identify a huge hole in their security, which does not exactly put her mind at ease. Loki again pushes for a meeting with the Timekeepers, always working his angle, and Mobius is willing to arm Loki for the mission, even if B-15 is having none of that. When they split up, B-15 insists that Loki goes with her instead of Mobius, because she doesn't trust him. Loki actually agrees to this, saying he understands that he needs to prove he can be trusted. Mobius is not sold, but I got the feeling that Loki was being more or less truthful here. Yes, he has his own agenda, but for the moment, he is on their side and will act accordingly. The Variant is watching them on CCTV, and as they leave, sets one of the TVA devices to a 20-minute timer. Loki and B-15 find someone who claims to be shopping in the greenhouse and are rightfully suspicious. When B-15 approaches the shopper, we see him grab her arm and something pass from him to her as he collapses. Loki asks if he's dead, but very quickly realizes that B-15 has been possessed. He does pick up on that change almost immediately, pretty much from the first sentence. The locals assume that the Minutemen must be from some kind of government emergency response, here to help. The Minutemen start searching the bags for the charges. Mobius, like in episode 1, stops one of the others who is showing no concern for the people, saying that just because they're all about to die. They find C-20, who's rather worse for wear, rocking and repeating "it's real" to herself. Loki and the Variant exchange some words, or rather insults. Loki judges the use of enchantments to be amateur but clever, and the Variant calls him a coward for selling out to the TVA, not believing that he's truly working for himself. The possession then jumps to a shop worker, and I think we see something important here. Loki immediately reacts to catch B-15 as she falls, and then goes to check on her. This is someone who has given him nothing but grief and threats since he's known her. You really couldn't have blamed him if he didn't care. But he did care, and he let himself be distracted checking on her. There seems to be a change of tone here. Loki almost seemed playful before. Now, frankly, he seems pissed. Calls out the Variant as too scared to face him. It was at this point I really started to think that the Variant was female. Kudos to the actors and their body language and the way they spoke for that. Loki offers the Variant a deal, says he found him so they could overthrow the Timekeepers together. He's turned down flat, the Variant having no interest in taking over the TVA. We see a shot of someone, presumably the Variant, setting up a reset charge as they walk off. The enchantment does explain how she can be in two places at the same time, but I haven't completely ruled out an accomplice yet. C-15 is still incoherent, but she does admit that she revealed how to find the Timekeepers. B-15 wakes up alone, and it seems like there are some after effects to the possession. She's shaky and disturbed. It's interesting that when she catches up to Mobius later, while the other Minuteman immediately assumes that Loki betrayed them, she doesn't seem to have immediately jumped to that conclusion. Loki tries to find out the Variant's plan, but is distracted for a moment and loses sight of her. The possession then passes to someone new, who proceeds to kick Loki's ass. This does indicate that the enchantment does grant the victim additional strength, etc., which also explains why C-15 took out her team so easily at the beginning of the episode. And can I pause here to point out how much better Loki's hair looks when it's actually Tom's hair and not a wig? Makes such a big difference. And then we finally get the reveal of the Variant. She tells Loki that it's not about him. Just as the timer reaches 0, all the lights go out, and the reset charges that have been placed around the store activate and drop through portals. Just as the timer reaches 0, the lights go out, and all the reset charges which have been placed around the store activate and start dropping through portals. Back at the TVA, timelines are branching all over the place. After one of his colleagues struggles to work out what the correct code is, another analyst grabs the phone and just says, "Someone has bombed the sacred timeline." Cue battle stations at the TVA. Alarms, alerts, people running through portals. Ravonna herself grabs a weapon. The Variant exits through a portal. Loki goes to follow, but hesitates when Mobius calls out to him. He pauses a long moment of Mobius shouting out to him to wait and trying to catch up, where Loki does seem genuinely conflicted, but eventually he follows through the portal just before it closes. And roll credits. A lot more action and less exposition and talking about feelings this week. I have to say, I'm still not sure what anyone's true motives really are. I'm not convinced that Loki's plan is anything as grand as taking over the TVA. I think he's happy for people to think that's what he's doing, but he gave that up far too easily when Mobius confronted him. And when he was pitching the idea to the Variant, it really did feel like one of his cons. I'm not sure he's after anything more than securing his own safety, his own right to keep existing, or maybe he just wants to change his own fate on the sacred timeline. I do also wonder if the whole concept of the TVA is such an abomination to him that he just wants to take them down and let time do his thing. I also think that Mobius is playing a longer game that we don't know about yet. Just a few hints here and there that make me think there is something he is after that he isn't saying yet. There was something about how he talked about having never met the Timekeepers that made me sit up and take note. We also see in his later conversation with Loki that there are things that he wants that he can't have as part of the TVA. He has dreams. He wants more than he can have where he is. He's stuck not able to do anything that might branch the timeline, and that's got to be limiting and restrictive. And it's interesting that he used the term glorious purpose to describe his role. A term Loki used to describe a purpose that was anything but glorious. A purpose built on lies. A purpose that claimed to be for the greater good when it was anything but. Don't get me wrong, I think he genuinely cares about the murders and wants to catch the Variant. I'm just not sure that he doesn't want more from Loki that he's letting on. And on to the Variant. First things first, I know I'm not the first person to think this, but I don't think it's Loki. Firstly, there's the whole look. The absolute easiest way to make her visually look like Loki would be to give her black hair. And they didn't. Not to mention, my first thought on seeing her headpiece was Scarlet Witch, not Loki. I don't think that's what I was meant to think, but that's what came to mind. And then there is how she talks. She doesn't sound like Loki. Loki's speech patterns are fairly distinctive. He uses metaphor and poetic phrasing. She didn't. I have shit to do? I mean, it was funny, but it really didn't sound like Loki. He'd have said something like, I have far better things to do with my time than bother with a pest like you. But better, because he's a team of script writers writing his dialogue and I don't. Another notable thing that points to not Loki is when the possessed C-15 was asked what she was doing, she replied, having fun, which is an interesting choice following on from Loki's reveal that he doesn't enjoy hurting people. And honestly, it really didn't feel like she was having fun later on. Loki would have been enjoying himself as his plan came to fruition. She was all business. It also feels a bit early for the reveal if there's not more to it. You'd think they'd have maybe built it up a bit more and also made more of it if this was the big reveal. Variant Lokis are apparently very common, so maybe this is another version of hiding in the apocalypses. If she gets close enough to appearing to be Loki, they'll just assume it's another variant Loki and keep pointing in the wrong direction. And if Loki is starting to suspect that, which I think he is, he must be concerned that he's about to lose the only thing keeping him alive. So my big questions for next week are, who is she? And what is her plan? Why did she bomb the timeline like that? I also want to see Mobius's reaction to Loki's perceived betrayal. Overall, I found it a solid second episode. The first episode set a pretty high bar and I was happy. It got the main plot rolling, gave us more questions than answers, which is good at this stage, and got me really looking forward to next week. What did you think of the episode? Do you think the Variant is really Loki? Let me know in the comments down below and I'll see you next week. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, and if you'd like to see more, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you'll know when I post the next one. But until then, have a good one.